Now, joining us to reflect on the life and times of the late former President Muhammadu Buhari and offering insider perspectives on his legal legacy, his leadership style, and the constitutional impact of his two-term presidency is the former Attorney General and Minister of Justice, Abubakar Malami. Thank you so much for joining us on Newsnight. Joining us, of course, all the way from Daura there. Thank you for joining us on Newsnight. First, let's get a feel of your thoughts, concerning former President Muhammadu Buhari's death and today's funeral in Daura.
Well, it all depends on the perspectives from which you want to look at the personality of Buhari. The point in time from which you want to analyze it and look at it. When you talk of President Muhammadu Buhari in terms of governance, in terms of administration as it relates to 80s, I'm talking of being the head of state in the 1983 to 1984. One fact that is certain and clear is the fact that he has indeed as much to instill a culture of discipline in the Nigerian space, in the mind of the Nigerian, as general processes associated with life, administration, and governance are concerned. I believe you can very well his bring about war against indiscipline, which was trying to establish an attitudinal change associated with the Nigerian psyche. When you talk of his political administration, talking of the 2013 to, talking of the 2013 to 2020, it is indeed about the service delivery as far as the Nigerian is concerned. Buhari is a man that governed with integrity. Buhari was a man that instilled discipline in governance. Buhari was a man that ensured the delivery of infrastructure, and indeed a man that bring about economic development of the nation, and indeed was a man that has succeeded in restoring the security integrity of the nation, taking into consideration that he came into governance. He took over the administration, the leadership of Nigeria at a time when about 17 local governments in the northeast were taken by Boko Haram, and then the territorial integrity of Nigeria was restored. He was a man that took Nigeria out of recession on 2 occasions during his administration in economic sense, and that indeed it was certainly a great achievement in economic. It was great achievement economic-wise. And then when you talk of the fight against corruption, he has constituted himself to be unique and exceptional, taking into consideration brought about many legislations that are targeted at bringing about the desired accountability, and extensively fought the corruption, inclusive of additional policies. The policies, he has given life to the policies associated with VVN, bank verification number identity, which has created some level of transparency, some level of accountability and visibility associated with with banking transactions. He brought about the single treasury account, which has equally created a governance-wide business associated with the funding of the finances of the government. So the way and manner you look at it, regardless of the circumstances at stake, taking into consideration the economic circumstances, the security circumstances, and indeed the general perspectives associated with governance, Buhari was exceptional. Buhari was unique, and Buhari has succeeded, taking into consideration, if you want to look at it from the infrastructure, a sense of the fact that he has succeeded in about the second Niger bridge, having it, notwithstanding the fact that it has been a project that has been stalled for decades. Lagos-Ibadan Expressway, among others, equally a landmark achievement as infrastructure. Abuja, Kaduna, Abuja, Kano was equally one of them, and multiple bridges that connected our economic environment to ensure accessibility of the rural, I'm talking of the rural areas, creating economic connectivity. And above all, he has taken a singular credit of ensuring that Nigeria has succeeded in bringing about food security, taking into consideration the fact that even during the COVID, at a time when we were not in a position to import a single grain into the Nigerian state, Nigerians were motivated, Nigerians were supported to produce what they eat, to the extent that a lot of industries, including the milling plants and a lot of fertilizer industries, came about.
All right.
And this, unfortunately, is no longer the situation taken into consideration. I understand that the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria has issued a report of recent that more than 90% of the industries have folded off, arising from perhaps maybe a policy somersault. So regardless of the way and manner you look at Buhari, the Buhari has indeed achieved a lot as far as the Nigerian state is concerned.
All right, Mr. Malami, thank you so much for that elaborate explanation of the legacies of former President Buhari. But you are his chief law officer. Let's talk about his legal legacy, because critics say that his administration often ignored court orders. How do you respond to that? Also, you spoke on corruption. It is true that the African Union recognized President Buhari then as the continent's anti-corruption champion. But back home, a lot of Nigerians just thought that corruption was repackaged. In fact, some of his cabinet members, your colleagues, up until today, still face corruption allegation. So how do you reconcile those two scenario and legacy? African Union recognizing him, and yet back home corruption was thriving, as some Nigerians would put it.
Well, during the period of the administration of President Muhammadu Buhari, the fact that corruption was not thriving at all. And it, regardless of the circumstances, the parameters used in assessment of the corruption as far as the time of President Muhammadu Buhari is concerned. If you talk of convictions associated with high-profile corruption cases, the government Muhammadu Buhari recorded convictions in thousands. Agencies like, commissions like Economic and Financial Crimes Commission had recorded unprecedented successes associated with convictions that runs into thousands. And if you talk of ICPC as well, the same record was established to the effect that a lot of convictions, much more than any other previous administration, were achieved during the period of President Muhammadu Buhari. And then if you look at it from the point of recoveries, for example, the fact is not in doubt that around $2 billion were recovered during the period of President Muhammadu Buhari in terms of recovery of illicit, looted asset. And if you look at it from the international assessment of establishments of refuge, United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime had as equally established in one of its reports that during the period of Buhari, a lot of successes were recorded. In fact, the Nigerian rating as far as the anti-corruption index was equally established to have done wonderfully well during the period of President Muhammadu Buhari. So when you look at convictions, he has established a record. When you look at recovery, he has established a record. When you equally look at it from the point of international commendations, he had equally succeeded in achieving a unique and exceptional record as well, to the extent that he was as well internationally recognized by African Union as the champion of anti-corruption. So regardless of the parameters, the parameters used in the assessment, the fact is not in doubt that Buhari has indeed achieved a lot. So I cannot understand the basis on which you can now adjudge that no much achievements were recorded during the period of President Muhammadu Buhari as far as the fight against corruption is concerned.
Staying on that, number one, President Buhari himself had once said that he perceived the judiciary as a hindrance to his anti-corruption crusade. First off, do you think it actually shaped, his attitude towards the legal institutions? And on the question as to whether indeed he was ready to fight corruption, there was this controversial pardon of two former governors, the governor of, former governor of Plateau State, Governor Darie, and of course the Taraba then governor, Governor Jolly Nyame. It questioned his anti-corruption credentials.
Well, you see, truly, the fact that these governors you are talking about were indeed convicted during the time when Buhari was in office is a credit to him that there are no nobody is exempted as far as as far as his anti-corruption crusade is concerned. So it is to his credit that governors that have, whose cases have been pending for decades without moving, were processed and prosecuted during his time. But the law equally make provision for the possibility of state pardon in exceptional circumstances. And I think as far as their release, eventual release or grant of pardon to them is concerned, the issue is an issue of law. The issue is whether the law has made provision for the grant of pardon, and then whether the pardon was granted in line with the law. When and then actions are taken in line with the law, I think the idea of perhaps maybe using the application of the law as a basis for conclusion that something done is wrong, something wrong is done, does not arise. The fact remains that they were convicted. The fact remains that in line with the provision of the law, perhaps consideration for pardon eventually was factored into consideration and then applied. So it was the application of the law. So the idea of blame associated with it does not arise to my understanding.
On the issue of the rule of law, were there times at all when you, as the Attorney General of the Federation, deferred or had arguments about his obedience or disobedience, for that matter, to the rule of law? For example, the IPOB leader Nnamdi Kanu, the ECOWAS court had, actually ruled him well, said that the government should let him go, and actually fined the government at the time, but the government of President Muhammadu Buhari did not obey the ECOWAS law. And also, the Supreme Court had actually advised the president on the issue of the Naira, change. The new Naira notes and the old Naira notes, the Supreme Court had ruled that until the case of the state governors had been, taken care of, that both new notes and the old notes should run pari passu. But the president did not obey that ruling from the Supreme Court. What would you say to that?
Well, when you talk of a rule of law, I think the perspectives and the basis and considerations on which you need to base your assessment is whether the law in its own right has provided a remedy that has been pursued by the government. When you have a judgment that has been handed down, that has been delivered by a court of law, and then arising from dissent to the judgment, you have taken a decision to appeal against the judgment. While that appeal is pending, you equally file an application for stay of execution, and it is granted. So you are indeed and in effect operating within the context of the rule of law. So the determinant is not a hook and sinker compliance with a judgment of the court where you feel that you need to exhaust other avenues provided by the law. When you are pursuing your remedies, you are right through the judicial processes that are established by law, the rule of law is coming into play, and not by way of an abuse of same, but by way of a compliance rule of law by way of compliance with the applicable law. So in all circumstances associated with the court in respect of which the administration of President Muhammadu Buhari found a agreement, we have done substantially was to appeal at the judgment and ensure that these as established by law are pursued. So when you pursue the rights available to you as a litigant, when you pursue the options that are on table, aligns with the principles of law, in line with prevailing legislations, the idea of rule of law is a debt of health. So I think it's a clear misconception for anyone to think simply there exists a judgment. Submit to the judgment, taking into consideration that the prevailing legislations, prevailing principles of law, prevailing processes and procedure allow you the exercise of the right of appeal, allow you the exercise of filing an application for stay of execution and application for stay of. So in the rule of law are incidental available remedies to the litigant, and once a litigant, and in our exceptional circumstances as a government then, once an application perhaps for stay of execution, stay of proceedings, and appeal is filed, you are operating within the context and ambit of the rule of law and not otherwise. Rule of law is a broader concept that accompanies associated remedies that are available to a litigant. Once you submit to the jurisdiction of the court and then file necessary processes, or perhaps maybe submit to the court by way of seeking alternative remedies and redresses available to you as a, I think you as well operating within the context of the rule of law. So it is now appreciation and of a rule of law to think that non-compliance with the court order in its own right exclusively without factoring additional and incentives available to a litigant constitute a breach, a non-compliance with the rule, a breach of the rule of law. No, the rule of law is
yes.
To be. Yes.
Oh, we are lucky to have had this conversation so far. The connection has been a bit disrupted. Yeah. But this is a yes or no question because we have to go. As an in-law, your family to the late president, and someone regarded as the inner kitchen cabinet caucus member of his administration, do you think President Muhammadu Buhari had any regrets? Yes or no?
Muhammadu Buhari had certainly no regrets about what he has done, about his stewardship as far as Nigeria is concerned. And then he has indeed done wonderfully well, both within the context of the economy, within the context of security, within the context of the infrastructure.
Thank you so much. Abubakar Malami was the Minister of Justice and Attorney General of the Federation to late former President Muhammadu Buhari. Thank you so much for your time on Newsnight.